Welcome to the Hope for the Animals podcast, a project of compassionate living. I'm your host, Hope Bohannic, and you can support this podcast by going to Compassionate Living's website and giving us a donation, compassionate-living.org/donate. So we're now going to be moving into a different direction. The last 4 episodes were focused on my new book, The Humane Hoax. If you're new to the podcast and just tuning in, please be sure to listen to the last 4 episodes that are about my book, especially episodes 78 and 80. Those were the book club episodes where we kind of unpacked some of the chapters from the book. So be sure to check those out. But today we're going to take a journey with a joyful vegan. We have Colleen Patrick-Goudreau telling us about her vegan tours to faraway places like Tuscany, Italy, and Rwanda, and about how she stays a joyful vegan. I feel like I'm a hopeful vegan, not particularly joyful necessarily. My husband, Kojin, is much more joyful than me. He has a natural, bouncy, positive energy. And we joke that he's like Tigger and I'm more like Eeyore on our outlook about the world. I know that for some of us, those of us who recognize and feel the suffering of the world, it can be hard to find joy in our lives, but Colleen's joy is abundant. So we will hopefully glean some of that joy from this episode. So we're going to jump right in. I hope you enjoy it. All right, I am so excited to bring in our guest today. Today we have Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. She is known as the Joyful Vegan. She's a recognized expert and thought leader on culinary, social, ethical, and practical aspects of living compassionately and healthfully. She's a longtime animal advocate and vegan, best-selling author of 7 books, an acclaimed speaker, producer of one of the longest-running vegan podcasts, a regular contributor to National Public Radio, and the host of luxury vegan trips around the world, which I can't wait to hear about. Welcome to the podcast, Colleen.
Thanks, Hope. I haven't told you, I love the name of your podcast.
Oh, thank you. I know I'm very lucky to have the name Hope. It works so well for what we do.
Indeed, I love it.
So I don't know if you know this, but you have been a mentor of mine for a very long time. I've heard you speak numerous times over the years. We've both been in the San Francisco Bay Area, and you speak often, and you've been very generous to speak at my events when called upon, and I always appreciate that. And I'm just so excited to have you on the podcast because I really have looked up to you for a very, very long time. So I'm really curious to know about your vegan origin story. I don't think I know. And you may have said it over the years and now I just don't remember, but we want to know. Please tell our listeners when and why you went vegan.
You haven't memorized my story, Hope? No worries. No worries. Yeah, my story, I always kind of preface it with this. I just feel like it is very similar to so many others. Just the details are, a little different, but I grew up in New Jersey and I grew up with a father who owned ice cream stores. I grew up, kind of typical kid, typical American family, mother, father, sister, dog, and I was one of those people who really loved animals. And I always say that you don't have to love animals to not want to hurt them. But I really was one of those children. And I still am one of those people who just, if there's an animal, I just have to interact with them. I have to greet them. I have to see them. I have to touch them. I have to pet them, what have you. And so I was that kid who loved animals. And my parents weren't necessarily animal people. They weren't necessarily people who were like that. But I remember when I would like to say adopted our dog, but I do remember we got her from a family who, whose dog had puppies. And I was just in love with this dog. And my mother was so kind to let me just spoil this dog. And I remember one of the first nights we had her, she was this tiny little thing, this tiny little schnauzer, this tiny little miniature schnauzer. And it was her first night away from her siblings and her mom. And I think we had just gotten like a second refrigerator or something down in the basement. And so there was this massive refrigerator box, and this little puppy was in this like massive refrigerator box, like probably scared to death, and was whimpering and crying. And I woke up in the middle of the night and I was crying because I was like 6. And she was just so sad. And my mother woke up with me and we took her out and we gave her some food and treats. And, that was just how I was. And I think most children are. And I think our parents encouraged that. And my parents certainly did. I, had, animals on my bed, stuffed animals on my bed. I had, wallpaper that had images of animals. I had clothing that had images of animals. In all these ways, we are taught to have this relationship with an appreciation for other animals, and including the books we're read and the films we watch and the animated shows we watch, right? And how we learn to count, how we learn to read, like in all these fundamental ways, animals are kind of used as our teachers. And then at the same time, I was being fed animals just like most of us are. And, I certainly didn't realize it when I was very, very young. But as I started getting a little older, I remember kind of asking, because we would go to the petting zoo and I'd love to see the animals. And when I kind of made the connection that I'm eating, chickens or cows, whatever, I asked, and it was, the same kind of response that my parents gave me, that I think a lot of other parents give their kids, not because they're trying to make their children insensitive, but just because that's all they knew, which was, well, animals are here for us and they don't feel the same kind of pain. And, they're sacrificing themselves for us and we should be grateful for that. And, I'm kind of conflating all of that together, but that was kind of the gist, right? That was the attitude. And so what happens, I think, is for me, and I think for a lot of us, that compassion that was so fierce and so strong in me, that's pretty unconditional when we're children. We don't see the difference between a dog or a cow or a pig, starts becoming compartmentalized. And so I start compartmentalizing my compassion and saying like, oh, okay, I guess, I can love my dog, but the cows, yeah, they're here for me. And like, that's just the nature of things. And then you start compartmenting the animals and your compassion, and you kind of start to like, quell this really fierce compassion. And so I then at that point developed a taste for animals and animal flesh and animal, fluids and the ice cream. I mean, we literally had a second freezer for ice cream, and we had hot chocolate machine, and we had candy, and we had just everything that, came out of an animal or came off of an animal. And so I went along for years like that. And then when I was about 19 or 20, I remember picking up Diet for a New America. It was John Robbins' book. And, of course, there was this connection. I certainly was not the inheritor of a fortune. It was not the same thing in that way. But in the sense of like kind of questioning, right, what you're raised with, and kind of questioning what you're exposed to.
Yeah.
It was it was powerful. And it really was the beginning of the journey for me, in that it was the first time I had ever seen any of those images. It was one of those books where it was just kind of in the center of the book. The text was the primary aspect of the book, but then in the center was just, kind of insert of these photos, black and white photos, but I had never seen photos of animals in these industrialized situations. So I was just completely just blown away, devastated and compelled to do something about it. And so I stopped eating land animals, but I kept eating aquatic animals. I kept eating eggs. I kept eating cow's milk. And it's funny because I didn't make the connection, even though there's a lot about the dairy industry and the egg industries in that book. But like a lot of us, I'm pretty good at compartmentalizing stuff. And so I did.
Yeah.
And so I did. And but I was also always someone, and I still am someone, who is always very curious and who always wants to do better, know more, improve. And so I just kept asking questions. And I was even working in a health food store at the time. I've always been interested in just food and wellness, and it's just been, kind of a part of who I am. I kind of remember working with someone who I think maybe was vegan, but I remember making the excuses about free range eggs. And I remember making those excuses. And so I just kept asking questions. And then eventually I read a book called Slaughterhouse. And it was the book that really put me over the edge. It was, for me, the difference between not wanting to be part of the way animals were raised and killed to just not wanting to be part of the fact that animals are brought into this world only to be killed. And it was the real difference for me. It was the real shift for me between what Diet for a New America gave me and that how it started this journey, and then Slaughterhouse, which was really about the slaughter industry and how I was paying people to do to animals what I would never have done ever, 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 ever myself. And I was really aware of the culture of violence. And that was what really put me over, was that it's bad enough that we bring animals into this world just to kill them, but it was the inherent violence. It was the culture of violence that's created in an industry that is literally characterized by killing. I mean, that's all it's there for.
Yeah.
And so you put people in a situation like that and they become desensitized to their own compassion. They become desensitized to the animal suffering. And that's what just literally snap of a finger couldn't do it anymore. And it's been the best decision I've ever made.
Wow, I remember those black and white pictures in the
Mm-hmm.
middle of Diet for a New America.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think for me as well, I think that was maybe one of the, some of the first images I ever saw of that stuff. And they were just black and white, but it was so powerful. And we didn't have the internet back then. We didn't have, colorful pictures and Instagram coming at us. So it was very powerful. I remember that. Yeah. And interesting that you said about how children have animals just all around them, stuffed animals and on their clothing and on your bedding. And it's almost like, parents use animals to teach us compassion, really, to show that, hey, we need to be nice to, other beings and be kind to others. But then we're feeding our children their cut up bodies in a very, as you said, a very violent act. So yeah, what a cognitive dissonance from a very, very early age. Just a very mixed message to give children, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, that is, that's the thing. We're so good at being able to compartmentalize. We just really are. And so it's not because we are cruel, and it's not because we lack compassion.
Yeah.
And indeed, we do use animals not only to teach children how to read and how to count and how to spell, but we use animals to teach us how to be social beings and how to interact with each other and how to be compassionate and kind. And of course, then we can go over here and say, and we're going to eat the animals. It's not because we don't care. It's because the story we tell ourselves is that it's okay and we need it, and that's what they're here for, all of those things. Because quite literally, when we have the cognitive dissonance, when we have this dissonance, this discomfort that animals are suffering, we know animals have to suffer. We know animals have to be killed in order to eat them. And we love animals. There's something, we're really uncomfortable with that. And the only way to reconcile that dissonance is to either change our behavior or to change our thinking about our current behavior. And those are the only two options we have. And so either someone realizes, wait, I'm not comfortable with this, and they quite literally either become vegetarian or, they start the journey pescatarian, vegetarian, vegan, right? That's usually how it works. Or they change their thinking about what they're doing. And that is either, I'm going to change the way I think I'm going to, think about what I'm doing in a way that's positive. I'm going to make sure I frame it so that it's positive, necessary, all of that. And, or we change our thinking, not just about our own behavior, but we change our thinking about the animals themselves. And that's what I think is really interesting, is the way we think about the animals we eat or don't eat actually informs whether we eat them or not, whether, because you'll hear people say, oh, I eat, whatever. I eat cows. They wouldn't say cows. They would probably say, I eat beef, but I stopped eating chickens because I met a chicken and she was, so smart and so sweet. And I saw how she was with her chicks and she was so loving and kind. I could never bring myself to eat a chicken again. Right. Something like that. The point being, but if you've never had an experience with or an understanding of the intelligence of in relationship, that cows have with their babies, then you just don't have an experience. And so you don't have an opinion. And so that doesn't inform your decision other than, yeah, I don't know them, or they're stupid, or they're dirty, or, all these things. The way we think about the animals also compels us to, behave one way or the other. So it's very interesting. And we don't do it consciously at all. But we certainly do it, and we certainly share it. as social beings, we share these same thoughts, and it's very powerful.
Yeah, knowing the animals, knowing their stories, knowing them as individuals is so critical, so key. So your brand, your theme is the joyful vegan.
Mm.
And I love that so much. Mine, of course, is hope, hope for the animals, having and holding on to hope. But joy, I think it kind of is a step beyond hope, like a step farther than
Mm.
hope. And that can be hard, I think, for some vegans. How do you stay joyful? How do you cultivate that joy? And why do you think joy is an important aspect of
Mm.
veganism?
Well, you kind of answered the question in your question. One is that I cultivate it, and that is something that I, with hope, the same thing. Like, we choose to either cultivate joy or hope or anger or despair. I mean, it really is a matter of what we choose to focus on. And look, I mean, my natural personality is to be optimistic. It is true that it comes to me naturally. I am a problem solver. I've always wanted to be. I've just naturally been a problem solver. As I said earlier, I always wanted to do better, learn more, improve, etc. But these are skills you can teach, and these are skills you can learn in terms of cultivating hope and cultivating joy. I think you're right. I actually think there's an element of courage in choosing to see hope, in choosing to be positive, in choosing to be joyful, because it's very tempting to not be joyful, especially, you could be, look at the world around us and you can see all the problems and you can see everything that's wrong with the world. And that's shared by a lot of people as well. So it's very tempting to kind of share that, yeah, everything's awful. I'm like, whatever, nothing's ever going to get better, right? That's very tempting. So I've always just been someone who really does genuinely see the good in people, and I see the good in the world. And one of the ways I cultivate joy is by actually focusing on hope. And it really is the awareness that things do get better and people do care. And it's true that there are a lot of problems in this world. It's also true that there are a lot of really good people trying to solve them. And we can choose to focus on one of those truths at any moment in our lives. They're both true. It's a matter of what we want to focus on. And so I cultivate it in the sense that I focus on what I think is good. That doesn't mean I deny what's not. It just means my focus goes on what's positive, what has worked, what's hopeful, where there's been progress. And in doing that, you can actually see, well, what's worked then, what's worked and what's not working. And again, I think the real mistake is that people think if you're hopeful or joyful, that you're being a Pollyanna, that you're not aware of, what's wrong in the world. And I think it also implies that you're never angry, or that you're never upset, or you're never sad, or you never feel bad. None of that is true. Of course I get angry, but I don't dwell on the anger. Of course I feel sad sometimes, but then I have my cry and I get myself back up and I do the work that has to be done in this world. So cultivation, exactly as you said it, and hope. And very naturally, I want people to I want people to see the joy in this. Like, if this were like a miserable life, because look, there are times where we're making a choice where we have less than somebody else. Let's say we're on a trip or in a restaurant. Maybe we have fewer choices in a restaurant, right? Like, there are some times where it's like, it would be a lot easier to just not give a crap, right? It would just be so much easier to not care, right? It just would be. And so like, if that were miserable all the time, if we're miserable all the time to live this way, none of us would last. We just wouldn't last. And so I want to feel good about the fact that I am reflecting my deepest values and my deepest connection with animals in my behavior. And I want people to see that. It means a lot to me that people see, oh, that looks like a really lovely way to live, and I want some of that too. So it's contagious too, and that means a lot to me.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that so much, and I kind of covet that, or long for that joy. For me, I mean, I definitely, I have to cultivate it too. I have to cultivate the hope, feeling deeply the kind of doom and misery of the world, to me is kind of therapeutic for a time. Of course, I don't want to stay there long, but I love dystopian films and novels and getting into, the just the intensity of the world. For me, I feel like I want to feel what the animals are feeling. And for some reason for me, I've got to feel it. Like I need to go there at times. But the challenge, of course, is to come through it and bring myself back to the hope and the joy. I certainly can be hopeful, and I do have a lot of hope. I believe very much in the inherent goodness of people and the inherent compassion of people, and that we will get to a place of compassion and hopefully a vegan world. But joy is harder, I think, for me to come to. It's hard, I think, to feel joy when I know there's so much suffering. It's tough for me, honestly. So what brings you joy?
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I want to just touch on what you said because it's so vital, because I think there really is a temptation among animal advocates, activists, vegans, what have you, to feel that we have to feel the same distress as the animals in order to demonstrate to the animals that we feel like we're letting the animals down if we feel joy, if we feel
Yeah.
okay, if
Yeah.
the world is a good place, right?
Yeah.
And I think what I'm hearing you say is something I talk about in the Joyful Vegan, in the chapter on anger, which is, if you can go there, like, we need to make sure we continue to bear witness. Absolutely. That is one of the things that reverts people back to eating animals, is they forget, right? So we have to always be mindful. And I do think we always have to remember. And that means we can look every once in a while, and we have to be really honest with ourselves how much we can take. And
Yeah.
it sounds like you know yourself well enough to know you can go there and then you can come back. Not
Yeah.
everybody can come back.
Yeah.
And because they haven't given themselves permission to stop looking for a while, they keep thinking they have to keep looking in order to demonstrate to the animals that I haven't let you down, that I see you, that I'm not turning away.
Yeah.
But the point, the balance is that we have to look, but we don't have to stare, and we shouldn't stare. We can't afford that. And so I actually have a maxim, which is, the animals don't need us to be as distressed as they are. They need us to transcend our distress so that we can end theirs.
Mm.
So there is value in looking, and there's value in feeling, like you said, but there is no value in staring. There is no value in us feeling so low that we can't get out of it. And so that's just something I just wanted to mirror back, that you said, that I appreciate. And I think we have to be honest with ourselves. If we're feeling in a low place, if we're already vulnerable, if we already tend toward depression, if we already tend toward anxiety, we need to make sure we're being really honest with ourselves, and knowing that we can still feel for the animals and still do the right thing for the animals without actually putting ourselves in a place that the consequence of which, ironically, is that we can stop being vegan and we can stop
Mm.
being an advocate for animals. And that is very real. So there's a lot to say about that. And I just want people to give themselves permission to step back
Yeah.
and find ways that they're actually soothing themselves and feeling good too. You can look, you can know, and you can still feel joy. You don't have to feel bad all the time to prove that you care.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
feel joy. What gives me joy? Oh my God, I feel joy quite often. I really am very genuinely joyful.
Oh, I love that.
It's true. I mean, I'm just moved by the world. I think it's an incredible place. I think people are amazing. I see, and I seek out, probably just, again, naturally, I see so much goodness in people. I see so much just desire to do the right thing. I just love nature. I love animals. I love just looking outside my window and seeing birds and trees, and then all the other things that give me joy. Tea gives me joy. Movies that I love give me joy. Art gives me joy. Music gives me joy. All the things that I get joy from, I go to every single day. I immerse myself in the things that I love and that bring me joy. And
Mm.
at the same time, I am still aware of what needs to be improved in this world, that never leaves me. But being vegan gives me joy because it is the most, I say easy, effortless is the word I would use. It's the most effortless way to manifest the values we hold in our hearts. Like there's no other cause we can believe in that can be manifested in our behavior every single day, right? Let's say I'm against the death penalty. How do I manifest that in my behavior every single day? I can write letters. I can, do the right thing. I can vote for people who I know are going to, get rid of the death penalty, right? But every day, like literally in the choices I make every single day, that's what being vegan means to me. And that was the freedom and the liberation that I felt when I did become vegan. And I've said, I didn't become vegan as much as I removed the blocks to the compassion that was inside of me. And once you remove those blocks, there is such a joy. That is enough. Like that is a reason to be joyful. And I feel that every single day. And I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah. Wow. So powerful. I feel that so deeply because, to me, things like, my first cup of coffee in the morning or having a piece of cake or a donut or something, those bring me, I would say, contentment, not necessarily joy. It's a positive feeling, but joy, I think you're absolutely right. For me, what brings me joy is my veganism, my activism, doing this work for the animals. That to me is what's truly joyful because I'm lining up my values and my ethics with my actions, and on a spiritual level that just feels so right to me. I really resonate with that what truly brings me joy is doing this work and knowing that we are doing the right thing and helping and moving in a compassionate, beautiful direction and bringing justice to these animals. Yeah, I love that. I love that.
Mm-hmm. And you don't have to do this work to feel that. And I just want to make sure that's clear to anybody listening, because we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to make sure we're being as effective as we can for animals and working as much as we can for them. Not everyone's an activist, and it is enough, and it is a lot if you're already making the choice to be vegan.
Yeah,
And so for some
sure.
people, I've seen them burn out, or I've seen them feel guilty, and they put so much pressure on themselves that they don't think it's enough that they can just be vegan. What I'm trying to get at is you can feel this joy even if you're not an activist. So by virtue of you just reflecting who you are, your compassion, your kindness, that is a lot. Not being self-effacing, not being apologetic about that, showing up and really just demonstrating that peace of mind that comes from manifesting your values and aligning your values with your behavior, that can be enough to bring you joy. And then as you do more, want to do more and want to do activism, doing work for animals, all that, that's even more reason to feel joy. So I just wanted to make that clarification.
Sure. And being vegan, that is activism. That in of itself, being vegan is absolutely helping. And activism doesn't look like one thing. Just being vegan in your life, showing up as a vegan is absolutely, I think, activism. And we need vegan dentists and we need vegan accountants and not everyone can be an activist. We need other things and other services in the world. And so if you are vegan and living with that kind of intention and compassion, I think that is absolutely needed as well.
That's right.
Yeah. So, Colleen, you have a fantastic podcast as well I hope mine's fantastic, but yours is certainly fantastic. And you've been doing it for a while now, I think 17 years. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, 17 years. It's called Food for Thought. It's a solo podcast, just you. I think you have a guest every now and then, but it's rare. And you have a segment called Small Bites, Sound Bites. That's like these 2 to 4 minute long. Most of them are kind of like the answers to typical vegan questions, and they're really great, really well done. I love listening to those quick sound bites. And you had one recently that I really loved. You were talking about how being vegan is about saying yes. And I think, people usually think veganism, when they think of veganism, they think of it being restrictive and having to say no to a bunch of stuff. I think we talked about that a little. But you talk about how, as vegans, we say yes. And I really loved that one. Can you talk about that and maybe about your podcast in a broader sense as well?
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks. I'm so glad you like them. It's relatively new, that little segment, and they're every week now. And I share these sound bites because I want to give something to enable other people to have mirrored back to them. So I want them to have some language to be able to use as they get these same questions, because we
Yeah.
all get these same typical questions.
Yeah.
And so they're short enough that people can wrap their brains around, a certain line or a sentence or a quote that they can use themselves. And so, yeah, and I'm all about reframing things. I am all about that. And so when it comes to that idea of there really is a perception that being vegan is just difficult, it's hard, there's deprivation, it's about saying no, it's about denying yourself things. I just don't see it that way at all. And so what I wanted to get at is there are all these ways that we actually are, it is abundance, and we're saying yes to things and we're embracing things as opposed to saying no to things. I think I maybe say in that particular episode, being vegan is about saying no to things. It's about saying no to unhealthy foods, and it's about saying no to violence against animals. So in those ways, there's also ways that we're saying no, not just no, I don't want that piece of cake, right? So even that's kind of a reframe. And then it's in all these ways we say yes. We say yes to our values of compassion and wellness. We say yes to our values of being accountable and bearing witness. We're saying yes to taking responsibility. We're saying yes to just all the things we do care about. And so it's just a way to kind of turn it on its head so people see the abundance and the positive aspects of being vegan. And it's not just about deprivation, because I think that's a real misconception about what it means to be vegan.
Yeah. I feel like now, I mean, it's, of course, I've been vegan for 34 years, and I never really feel like, I'm missing something. To me, there's just more options than I can eat in a week, so it's fantastic. I'm sure that that varies for people as, they're getting into it and learning about what to choose and things like that. So, there can be some frustration, I'm sure, around that. Also, I think where you live, what the options are as far as restaurants and things like that. But for the most part now, so much more than, and we know this from, 20 years ago, there's so many more options, so many more opportunities to have just a variety of vegan foods. So yeah, I don't feel that I'm saying no to anything, at least anymore.
I do think there's a difference between becoming vegan and being vegan. And I do, that's why I have my 30-day vegan challenge, is because I do think that making any kind of change is difficult for people. So any kind of transition, we need support. And
Yeah.
we are realizing that, oh my gosh, like, what do I do now since I'm not doing this thing over here? And so the process of becoming vegan, I think, does require help and support. And it is difficult for people. Change is hard for people. But being vegan, once you shift those habits, that's a different story altogether. And
Yeah.
that's the effortlessness that I talk about. Being vegan is once you know what to choose and what all the options you have and what you're saying yes to, that's a different story than becoming vegan. So you making that distinction, I think, is a good one, because I think there's a difference between the two.
Yeah. Well, I know that you actually take people on journeys to other countries, and you're going to be, I think when this podcast comes out, you may be in Italy because you're going to Italy in June. And I know that you have some upcoming trips to France. Tell us about these adventures. Where have you gone? How did this come about? Why do you pick the countries that you go to? And what are these journeys like? Tell us about all this.
Yeah, it's just another extension of what brings me joy, for
Yeah.
sure. And another extension of something that I've always loved. I've always loved traveling. I was a travel editor for a while at a travel publication,
Okay.
many years ago. And so that's always been something that I've really loved. And because demonstrating that there is no deprivation, demonstrating that there is joy, demonstrating that there is abundance wherever you go, wherever you live, wherever you are, that's part of my mission. And so I started doing the trips back in 2015 or 2014 was one of the first ones I did, and it was with some tour leaders, a travel company, and we went to southern Italy. And I've always loved Italy. It's been a place that I've always loved. And so being able to bring people along and say, this is what it's like being vegan and traveling wherever you go, and obviously being able to take care of it for people. So long story short, I started working with a couple who they were podcast listeners who became vegan from the podcast, and they came on those two early Italy trips. They came on both of the early Italy trips, and they started planting the seeds because they had a background in travel. So this couple, they're very good friends of mine, Bridie and Seb. So we were traveling to Africa together. We went to 4 countries in Africa together. We were in Rwanda and Botswana, and we were in Zimbabwe, South Africa. And so he started, just really planting the seeds, because Rwanda is a place that I had always wanted to go to see the mountain gorillas, to see the work that Diane Fossey had done.
Yeah.
And so he just started saying, like, we could do this. And I'm like, no, what are you talking? No, there's no way. And so finally they were living in Bangkok at the time. And he said, let me put a trip together for Thailand. Let me show you what this could look like. And he did. And I sold it very quickly to my audience. And it was just a huge hit. And he was amazing. And that's really how it started. And so then how do we pick what we pick? Well, Thailand was obvious because, it's a real destination for a lot of North Americans. They want to go to Thailand. And Bridie and Seb were living in Bangkok at the time. And then from there, Rwanda became the next one, because the people who were on Thailand heard that we might do a trip to Rwanda, because Seb started planting that seed to them. And they said, if you run a trip to Rwanda, we will come. And we put it together. And within 48 hours, the trip sold out.
Wow.
And
How many people go?
So it depends on the trip. We usually kind of cap it around 20. This trip was a larger one because, we're going pretty far, and we had the ability. We like to take over villas or hotels wherever we go when it's possible. We like to take over. So, for instance, the Alsace trip we do in France, and that's going to happen in 2023 in December. It's a Christmas market trip. It's a really magical Christmas kind of trip in a part of France that is incredibly vegan unfriendly. It's in it's in Alsace, and so it's on the border of France and Germany, and it was a part of Germany at one time. And so the cuisine is very heavy, very Germanic, and it's in the wintertime. So the fact that we can veganize everything for people is quite amazing. Like it's quite remarkable. And we take over the villa there. So that's like 25 people. So I think the
And when you say take over, you mean it's just you all at the
yes,
location. Okay. Yeah. Great.
exactly. So in times when we can't do that, we like to have our own areas where we eat, because we just don't want our people to, like we were talking about, right? We're exposed to this stuff all the time. We want to break. We want to just get away from it for a little bit and not see the effects of animal exploitation and abuse. And so even when we're in places where we can't, larger hotel where we can't take over the hotel, obviously, we have our own sections. It's just a little bit of a protection, so our folks don't have to ever worry about that. But when we can take over a hotel or a villa, like we do in Italy, in Tuscany, we take over a villa it's called I Pini. In northern Italy, which is another trip we do, which I'll be doing after the Tuscany trip, the places we stay they're just larger, and we don't take over. But in Alsace we do, and what's so much fun is just working with the chefs who are just open and really interested in accommodating us. And we see so much openness, and we see so much transformation that happens in the staff, in the chefs, in the kitchen, everybody who works in the kitchen. And that's really exciting. And then we do see that it, it goes on after we leave, that they implement things that we taught them, after our trip is over. So it's really incredible. Watching these friendships form on these trips is so beautiful. So it's a beautiful experience. And I feel like a mother hen who just watches all of her chicks just, have this incredible time. And I'm so proud of that. I'm so proud of being able to give this to people who want to travel, not worry about it, feel the abundance. We're going to spoil the heck out of you. That's why we do.
That's fantastic. How much fun. That sounds just really, really incredible. But of all the places you've gone, what would you say is maybe the most vegan friendly? Like when you go to the towns and to the cities, where is getting more vegan friendly? Do you know?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for me, Tuscany is the most vegan friendly place. People really have
Really?
we think about Italian food. We're really thinking about Italian American food. Italian American cuisine is very different than Italian cuisine, and
Ah.
especially in the South and especially in the central part of Italy. As you get farther north, it's much more vegan unfriendly. Just historically, it's been wealthier. It's up in the mountains, so it's colder. And so there's a lot of chickens, eggs, and a lot of meat and a lot of butter. So, but down south, you have olive oil and you can grow all the vegetables and you're growing all the
Mm.
tomatoes and you have all the trade with, the Middle East and, North Africa. I mean, so you have more spices. And so it's a very different history and a very different climate and a very different topography. So it's just different. And Tuscany, the central part of Italy is where the agriculture is. And same thing with the South. So Tuscany is an incredibly vegan friendly place. So, when we go out and do have lunches at restaurants, what's really lovely is they say, because we're like, make it all vegan, obviously, and we're working with the chefs in the restaurants. It's really lovely for them to reflect and go, actually 80% of what we already do is vegan, right? So
Mm.
we're giving you all of our special dishes anyway. We're just going to eliminate the things that are not. So they
Yeah.
recognize, because, they're not using butter. They're not using, a lot of eggs, for instance, in the pasta. The pasta tends to be eggless. And so that's the place for me that's just really amazing, because the food is just incredible. I mean, that's why the slow food movement came from Italy. I mean, it literally is, you are having the wine and the olive oil and the vegetables and the produce. It's all from within a 5-mile radius. Like, I mean, it's all from either on site or just, nearby. So that to me is exciting. And then bringing people to Northern Italy, where it is, as I said, vegan unfriendly, and working with folks to make it vegan. That's the challenge that we love. Alsace, as I mentioned, is very vegan unfriendly. Now, Paris, now obviously in the cities, it's easier
Right.
wherever you go, whatever country you're in. But
Sure.
in countryside, like we're doing the French countryside trip, that's in the Loire Valley this September in 2023, that is incredibly vegan unfriendly. Cheese everywhere. It's just animal-based cheese everywhere. So we'll bring, lots of wonderful plant-based cheeses from Paris with us so that we're spoiling. We do fondue. We do all of these really wonderful, obviously plant-based versions of the things that are in the region of the Loire Valley and the Dordogne, but we love that challenge. Now, I will say, interestingly, and then you go to Africa, I mean, depending on the country, obviously, but, again, in most of these places, the foundation is plant foods, right? The foundation in Rwanda, Rwandans don't eat a lot of meat, maybe once a week. And so we're eating, the cuisine of the country. We're eating the grains or the tubers and root vegetables, and then we're doing a lot of fancy things, because there's lots of wonderful restaurants doing really great things with produce. Interestingly, we have about 400 people on a wait list for Japan.
Wow.
And yes, and so Japan was closed for a long time. It's partly why the list kept growing, is because people just want to come to Japan, and Japan was just closed down for so long after COVID. I think they were one of the last countries to open back up again. And
Mm.
so Bridie and Seb just scouted. Japan is not easy, and I think that's why people are really interested. They want to go to this incredible country and experience all of the culture and history and traditions, and they don't want animal products. And I will tell you that you can do it. I mean, that's part of the message we give, right? Like, no, you can do this. You can do this anywhere. You'll figure it out. You go and eat some fruits and vegetables in Costa Rica or Japan. Like, you'll figure it out. But
Right.
it's not going to be like what you want to experience, the abundance, and you don't want to have to say no, and you don't want to have to just like compromise, and you don't want just the good enough, right? That's why we do this. But that's an example of a country where they don't accommodate you. If you come into the restaurant, you get what they're serving. And if there's not something already vegan, they're not going to go and make something special for you in the back. So there are some really interesting things there. And especially as you get out to the countryside more, where, if you don't speak Japanese, they're not speaking English outside of Tokyo. And so, or the major cities like Kyoto, et cetera, and Hiroshima, et cetera. But those are examples of it's a lot tougher. It can be done, but it's a lot tougher. And again, in the cities, it's easier. There's more, there are vegan restaurants in Tokyo. There are vegan restaurants in Paris. There are vegan restaurants in all of these places in the cities. But once you leave the city, then you're in the countryside. And that's just like here, just like in the United States. The more rural you get, the more animal products there are
Yeah.
And so yeah, that's the challenge we love to overcome.
So, speaking of cultures and other cultures, for some, there are that kind of is a barrier for veganism, a barrier around culture and traditions and animal product eating. I mean, every culture on earth has animal product eating. Some actually don't eat meat, but then they'll eat dairy or other animal products. So, how do you balance, promoting veganism while still respecting different cultures and dietary traditions? I think you do that. You've spoken about this, and I think you do this really well. So, can you talk about that kind of balance where we don't want to change culture or people's cultures and traditions? We just want to veganize them, right? So how do you talk about that?
Well, as I said, it's not even just we want to veganize them. We're going to identify what's already there that is vegan. And when I say vegan
Yeah,
in this case, I have to say plant-based, right? Because we're talking about food and we're not talking about entertainment and that kind of thing. That's a different conversation, and we can
sure.
certainly have that. But when we're talking about food, there already are so many dishes, foods, ingredients that are already plant-based. And so it's identifying what already exists, and that this is the reframe that I'm talking about. It doesn't take much to do that. I talk to people from all these places all the time, and maybe on an initial reaction, they might say, well, how are you going to do vegan? I mean, when people say, how are you going to be vegan in Italy? I do have to say, you what? Like the foundation of Italian cuisine is plants, but any culture, the foundation of any culture has been plant foods. And so
Yeah.
the thing we forget, this history is so important, is that for millennia, plant foods, it's always been the food of the poor, and animal products have always been the products of the wealthy. And so as we see more people become, gain more wealth, et cetera, and wherever you're talking about across the world, they will start wanting more animal products because they can afford them.
Mm,
Now, I'm talking about even in cultures where in most places these days, unfortunately, because it's so industrialized, it is so much cheaper, or it's cheaper than it's ever been before. But it, like, initially, early on, historically, animal products have always been the products of the wealthy. And even today, it's still the case, even with subsidized meat, dairy, and eggs. It's still less expensive to buy whole plant foods, even without them getting subsidized. That's how expensive animal products are, is that even subsidized, they are still more expensive. And, I'm talking about just dollars and cents. Obviously, there's a lot more costs than just
yeah.
dollars and cents, right? A
Yeah.
lot of costs. And so those are not getting built into that cheap meat that people are buying. So what I'm trying to get at is, when I think about food around the world and different cultures and cuisines, it's no different than what they already have. It's just they've gotten away from it, just like we've gotten away from it as just a human species. We've gotten away from food, plant foods being the foundation. So much of it is just framing and just, what we choose to look at, what we want to focus on, but it's already there. We just have to put a light on it. And and everybody I've ever talked to in any country I've ever been, they go, yeah, you're eating our food. That's our food. That's the foundation.
Yeah.
Yep.
So kind of shifting in a different direction, I love that you have episodes on your podcast about our environmental impact, about the environment and the planet and zero waste and reducing plastic. And you even had one about reducing junk mail.
Hmm.
And I remember that one. I actually took some steps that you had recommended. So that was really informative. So I wondered if you wanted to talk a little about the importance of protecting the planet beyond veganism, or really, I mean, as I like to think of it, it's part of veganism because wild animals are so affected by what we do to the planet. It's all very connected. Do you want to talk a little about that?
Yeah, and sure. I mean, again, I am very sensitive to language, and when I hear you say it's part of veganism. So for me, the reason I'm vegan is because I want to be as compassionate as possible. That for me, being vegan is actually part of compassion. Being zero waste is part of compassion.
Yeah.
Being mindful about my impact on the environment is about compassion. it's not for me about being vegan. It's about being compassionate. And that's what being vegan is for me. And so this was an extension again of my compassion when I looked at my behavior and I went, wow, I thought I was doing pretty well. Like, and I was, and I am. And there's always more to do. Whatever it was. I mean, I was already like shopping with canvas bags, and we've gray watered our plumbing, and we have an electric car. And then I went, oh, where are some ways that I could do better? And that's what really kind of started me on my, what's called the zero waste journey. Not a perfect term, because of course there's no such thing as zero. We cannot be perfect, but it's aspirational. And that's what has been really exciting. And it's definitely challenging. And it's been really fun to kind of see the parallels between guiding people to being vegan and then having the same experience of zero waste, in terms of there's no such thing as perfection. We're never going to be able to completely be zero waste. Even veganism is not perfect. We don't, we can't do everything, possible to, not be part of some kind of harm, unintentionally, but having an intention and just doing the best we can means a lot to me. And so I started that journey, and I will tell you that the junk mail was definitely one of the most difficult aspects.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the way I've kind of whittled down zero waste, for me, it's about value and it's about responsibility. And so when I think about a choice that I'm going to make about something I'm going to buy, and knowing that the thing that I'm going to do, the thing I'm going to buy, the impact I'm going to have could be forever, that if I buy something, that has let's say I used to buy frozen blueberries at Trader Joe's in the plastic bags. I love those blueberries. I miss those blueberries. I wish I could have them if I want to. But when I imagine opening that bag up, and that will never be recycled, that is not going to be recycled, and that it's just going to sit forever because I wanted frozen blueberries, that became really visceral. Like, just I imagined it, and it just became really hard. And so those are the kinds of decisions I started making. And, so what does that mean? I buy fresh blueberries, the farmer's market, when they're in season, and I freeze them myself. I also started growing blueberries. I haven't had any yet, but I have like 4 wine barrels full of blueberry bushes, and someday I hope to have them. But the point is, I was willing to look at where I could take responsibility, and also where I can value what I do take into my life and what I do bring into my life. And so it's been a really wonderful adventure. I'm just trying to do the best I can on this earth, and I'm never going to be perfect, but I just want to do what's right.
For me, what helps me, like with a plastic bag, for instance, like you were talking about the blueberries and a plastic bag, visualizing how that plastic bag is going to go out into the ocean, break down, get eaten by fish and seabirds, and disrupt their digestion and possibly kill them. Like, that's what helps me to stop, to visualize what's going to happen to that packaging beyond my garbage can or my realm. I don't know. Visualizing that really helps me to do the right thing and to try to reduce my waste. We have so much impact and we don't realize it.
I love that. I often say that it's not that we can't make a difference. It's that we do make a difference. We either make a positive difference or a negative difference. That's it. We have an impact all the time, and we can have a positive impact or we can have a negative impact. We just have to choose at every given moment, when we're making these decisions about how we discard things, or what we buy, what we bring into our lives, et cetera. And absolutely, it's one of the reasons I love that, you're seeing more and more garbage cans, municipal garbage cans called landfill, as opposed to just say garbage. It forces people to kind of think about where that's going to wind up. I think it should say ocean, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. And it is literally the thing, like, that's what I mean about the bearing witness. All I have to do, it has never changed for me in the 24 years I've been vegan. I just remember a particular passage. There was one story in Slaughterhouse that stuck with me, and that I have never forgotten. All I have to do is think about that. And that's what enables me to, like, it's effortless, right? And so you're absolutely right. Look, when I picture that plastic bag, where it would go, who it would harm, that I caused that, that's just, I don't want to be part of that. And that's, I know, again, like I said, it'd be so much easier to not care. It'd be so much easier because I love those blueberries. But, I just have to think about that. And I really appreciate that you said that. That's the truth.
Yeah. If we didn't care, we wouldn't get that joy, that deep joy of caring and compassion that I think is a higher, more beautiful, more spiritual joy than just, a new something or a cup of coffee or whatever else, in our lives. It's this deeper, more intense and beautiful joy of caring, of making that choice to care.
That's
Yeah.
right. I mean, that tastes better than any frozen blueberry from Trader Joe's.
That's right. Yes. Well, Colleen, I feel like I could just talk to you all day. I have enjoyed this so much, and I'm so glad you came on the podcast. Thank you so, so much for being here. I'm going to ask you our last question. What gives you hope for the future?
The past.
Huh. Why do you say that?
Knowing where we've been and
Mm,
knowing where we are now relative to that. When you know your history and you know what it's been like, and you know where we were 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 10 days ago, whatever it is, I have perspective about the future because I know what it's been like in the past. And
yeah.
I really, really mean that. I mean it. In anything you care about, just read your history. And when it comes to animal history, there's some wonderful books that I really encourage people to read. I do think as animal advocates, we need to know the history of the animal protection movement, and we need to know on whose shoulders we stand. And so I really encourage anybody who's interested, especially to have perspective and hope for the future, is to learn more about the past. That's what gives me hope.
Yeah. Advocates like us that are longtime vegans, we know how far we have come in these decades, these last few decades. So yeah, it's very hopeful.
And people like you hope, and people who are doing the right thing. People give me hope because I see good things happening all the time. And so just good people like you who are doing the work, who are trying to do the right thing, who's leading with compassion, that's what gives me hope. People who are doing this work give me hope. I mean, I feel it every single day. I see it every single day. And so thank you for everything you do.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for everything you do, Colleen. It's amazing. I love all of your activism. It is so joyful and positive and just what the world needs right now. So thank you so much for all you do. And thank you for being on the podcast.
Thanks so much, Hope. Have a good day.
You too. Thank you for listening to the Hope for the Animals podcast, a project of compassionate living. So, in the beginning of this interview, when we were talking about cultivating joy, it, it kind of turned into a bit of a therapy session for me. I found myself really contemplating the concept of joy, even after we recorded the interview. What is joy? I think that maybe Colleen and I were kind of having a different idea of the meaning and expression of words, actually, like joy and activist, what it means to me, what it means to her. It's interesting how you can have different ideas of even just the meaning of one word. And language and communication, it's so important. It can be the difference between understanding and misperceiving. But I think to me, joy is like elation, like beyond happiness, something reserved for very particular moments in life that are beyond happy, beyond daily things. And that to me, I experience rarely. And reflecting on it further, I think I'm okay with that. It's my nature to be more melancholy and thoughtful, just as it's Colleen's nature to be more exuberant and joyful. I don't know that we have to feel that we're missing anything or lacking anything if we don't feel joy every day. Like I said in the episode, I do feel contentment and gratitude and a degree of happy every day, and that's enough for me. But again, we may just be considering semantics here. Is happiness joy? I kind of feel like they're different. Maybe not, but ultimately that doesn't matter. In the end, I think what Colleen and I both are trying to convey is to encourage people to work on, cultivate, find your happy, find your joy, find your contentment, whatever you want to call it, to whatever degree it manifests in you, and try not to let the sadness of the world, the knowledge of the suffering overwhelm you to the point of inaction. right? I think that's really the point. And that's another thing. I think that people are motivated by different things. And I think that my anger, my sadness, my frustration, my mulling over it all is motivating to me, let the knowledge be motivating. But again, if it's crippling, then it isn't helping anyone, you or the animals. So, keeping the hope that we can create a joyful world for animals. And something else that I thought about that this kind of brought up is that I've seen animals be so joyful, right? Animals can just really express and show us how to be joyful. I think about how excited dogs get to see their person, or really sometimes anybody, a stranger. I mean, they get all wiggly and zoomy. And I think you can certainly say that dogs are joyful daily. Probably most of them, if they're in a good situation and are, in a happy home, are joyful daily. And there's videos of cows and goats and pigs and all different farmed animals getting excited, being joyful. But then there's cats. So we all have different natures, but a cat can certainly be content and purring. So, find what makes you positive, those positive moments, that positive energy. Find your happy, find your joy, get motivated to do something to help and live vegan.